Hello, wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of the Web Platform Podcast. This week, I'm your host, Justin Ribeiro, and with me, as always, Mr. Danny Blue. Danny, how's it going out there?
It's going pretty good, Justin. It's a little echoey. Couldn't get my my nice padded room, but we'll make it. We'll make it work.
You know, I think all developers should eventually have a padded room. I think it helps just, the psyche as you try to work through whatever debugging technology you're dealing with that day.
They tell me it's for soundproofing, but I don't know if I believe them.
Well, sometimes no one wants to hear
developer
the developer tooling. This is on my contract. I need soundproofing. But alas, we're not talking about soundproofing today. Today we're on episode 113. We're talking about UpUp and service workers. And our guest this week, the very famed, the very wonderful Tal Adder. Tal, thank you so much for being with us today.
Hey, my pleasure. Hey, thank you.
So, for those viewers out there who don't know you, tell them a little bit about yourself. How'd you get started on the web? Why talk to us today about UpUp and service workers?
Okay, so I'm a developer from Tel Aviv, Israel. I've been doing this for as long as I can remember. I've been doing this web thing since about '96 on GeoCities, more than 20 years now. Man, I'm old. And I've been focused a lot on the back end and the front end, and back in the days of Perl and ASP Classic and PHP and etc. And in recent years, I've really been more and more drawn towards JavaScript, towards the front end, because there's just so much going on there. It's like it's a JavaScript renaissance right now. Every day there's something new, there's something exciting, there's new browser APIs, there's new frameworks, there's JavaScript fatigue, there's anti-JavaScript fatigue, there's like so much happening every day. And I love it. I'm one of those that are excited by the ride and enjoying it. So all of this led me to get involved with open source more and more. Initially, probably as an outlet from my day job, which was back then I was managing a couple of R&D teams and managing a product department, and I was missing the code. I was missing the hands-on, which kind of led to me coming home every night at 8 p.m. then sitting until 2 a.m. building open source, and that's how I got here.
Is that how all open source is built? I sometimes wonder if just people are just sitting around going, you know what? It's 3 o'clock in the morning. It's time to write some code.
I can tell your enthusiasm makes me tired.
Yeah, I mean, open source is written like so many different ways, and I've experienced them all. Like as a way to I'm a procrastinator and I'm lazy, and as a way to motivate myself to do open source, I've committed to doing something every day. Back when GitHub had that streak counter, and now it doesn't, but I'm still keeping it up, doing something every day. It's been over 300 days so far of doing something every single day, which means I've written code on buses, planes, between snowboarding and parties. I've even 3 months ago, exactly to the day, I wrote I accepted a pull request in the delivery room where my first daughter was born. So it happens everywhere. It happens all sort of ways.
Your wife is very understanding.
Yeah, she's amazing.
You hear that, internet?
They both are.
Excuse.
Yeah, I think my streak, I capped out about 100. 100 was about my, I could do about 100 days. But by 100, I felt just the overall, am I producing any code at this point that is even legible? There is that fear, I think, with a lot of open source, because it's hard to get started in open source. I think it's gotten easier with things like GitHub, but I'm old too. I started in the 90s, and I remember how hard it was to sort of dive in, primarily because I didn't know what I was doing. And when you don't know what you're doing, sometimes people let you know you don't know what you're doing in very harsh tones.
Yeah, luckily there's a lot of people now trying to make this easier, trying to make it much easier for people to get into open source projects and Twitter accounts, like your first pull request and stuff like that, where people are creating issues that are specifically geared towards beginners who've never contributed to open source. And I've actually, some of my 300 plus days were just days where I just created issues for new developers, very detailed, like step by step. I mean, it took me probably like half an hour to write each issue, which I could have probably done myself, like solve the issue in 5 minutes. But just getting people involved for the first time in open source is really cool. And a few times I've even then gone ahead and worked with those people to create new first-timers issues. So I've worked with them to create their first issue, and then they've helped other people. So it was like a first pull request recursion. That was really exciting.
And so through all this open source stuff, you came up with UpUp amongst many of the things that you've sort of been working on, which sort of deals with sort of this offline first approach that we talk a lot about here at the Web Platform Podcast, as well as, you know, conferences and whatnot. I mean, how did you get the idea for UpUp? Did you have a conversation in the open source community that said, oh, you know what, we need a means to do this in a different sort of fashion?
Yeah. So actually, I was very lucky to be in a Google I/O conference in 2014. There was a talk by Jake Archibald and Alex Russell, who I've never heard of before until that day. And they were talking about service workers. And for me, I don't go to talks to learn something, to learn how to use technology. But if it's a very good talk, then halfway through it, I won't hear anything because my mind will already be racing and programming and taking to the next step. So I probably didn't hear the second half of that, which means it was a good one. But yeah, I took that, and a few months later, I created UpUp, which it's not strictly offline first. It's not a tool to create progressive web apps. It's what I decided to do was to take this new tool, this new technology, and take a very simple use case and create a very opinionated library that allowed you to implement that in the easiest way possible. So anyone who knows even the smallest amount of HTML and JavaScript could get started. So it's not offline first. It's not a progressive web apps, but it's a gateway drug to it.
There is a lot of potential with service workers. I mean, you can dive as deeply as you want to go, or as shallow as you want to go to get started. Do you think that, as you sort of started to build UpUp, do you find developers getting used to the idea of service worker?
Yeah, it really is so deep. Like, there's so much to learn. There's so much everything is new there. So there has been so many questions coming up from the community and so much confusion about the technology behind this. It uses cache storage, but people were thinking, is it app cache? Is it HTTP caching? And everyone's thinking there was so much confusion. So this led me to read more, to learn more, and to start writing about this and speaking about this. And this led me to write a book, which is coming out in a few months, hopefully, called Building Progressive Web Apps, which is really a deep dive. I mean, if UpUp is just a very narrow use case of one thing you can do with service workers, Building Progressive Web Apps is a book that delves into everything, from building your first service worker to understanding its life cycle, understanding cache storage, IndexedDB, promises, the Fetch API, push notifications, everything. It's a very deep dive into building something that it's a very hands-on book where you take an existing simple web app for a hotel called the Gotham Imperial Hotel, and you take it and you turn it into a progressive web app that basically works almost as well offline as it does online. I mean, you can go offline and make a reservation and close the app. And as soon as you go back, as soon as you regain connectivity, it will make that reservation with background sync and let you know that it has been made with push notifications. You can launch it in full screen from a home screen icon. It has everything that you can do with a native app, but it's a progressive web app.
That's pretty cool. That's a lot of stuff all packed into one thing. But you were just so you're going to just talk about that being like progressive web apps and how cool progressive web apps and service workers are actually kind of a part of progressive web apps. But just in case, just because like Stanley said, everybody's comic book was somebody's first comic book. I think we should rewind just a little bit and do two things. So first, let's talk about what a service worker is, and after that, you said UpUp makes use of service workers, but it's not for progressive web apps. And let's talk about what a progressive web app is, and or specifically how UpUp differs. How UpUp's use of service workers differs from that of a progressive web app.
Okay. So service workers are, it's basically a type of script that you can register from your page, and the browser runs it in the background. So you're basically writing some simple JavaScript, and it's running not in the scope of any one page or window, but in the browser. So at this point, you basically have three layers or three different places where things happen. You have your page and you have the network, which is the traditional model, but you also have something in between, a service worker. And that service worker can talk with the page or it can talk with the network. So, and it can work independently of one of the two. So a service worker and the page can interact between each other even when there's no network connectivity. And if you take that further, a service worker and the network can interact between each other even when all the pages of a site are closed, which allows for things like re-engaging users with push notifications and stuff like that. But diving a bit more into what service workers actually are, it's a layer that sits above the page and can listen to events as they come from the network or the page. So for example, you can listen to fetch requests. So this isn't just people who know the new fetch API. It's not just the new fetch API, but every request made from the page, whether it's like an image tag or a script or a style sheet or anything goes through that fetch request and you can intercept it. So you can write a service worker that listens to every request, passes it onto the network, and then returns the response. So in essence, you've done nothing, but you can then go on and say, okay, only for requests which contain, for example, where the URL contains bootstrap.css, for example, you can, instead of going to the network, you can return a body background color equals blue. And then in your page, your background would change color. So it's a very simple example, but what you've actually done is you've created a sort of a proxy server which can take requests from the page and modify them and redirect them and return different results. And you can take that further, and which is what UpUp does. It lets every request go through it unhindered and returns the response without touching it. But because those requests are actually JavaScript promises, if they fail, meaning the user is offline or your server is offline, they can catch that occasion and try and return the same file from the cache. So you're creating a caching server within the service worker. That's basic.
Go ahead, Justin.
I saw your lips start to move, and then I was like, I don't want to cut Danny off.
Justin and I both just opened our mouths and stared at each other for a second. It's a beautiful thing, Justin. I'm glad we could share that moment.
Yeah, this has been a special moment here on the Web Platform Podcast. Network proxy. Yeah, network proxy, I think, is the major. Like when people ask me about service worker, I always bring up network proxy because the power within that idea to be able to return the things that you want to return, whether that's on the network or in your cache, is an incredibly powerful notion when you really start to break it down into the little things. The case that I love to tell people about is I'm like, wow, you have a lot of images that your cache headers seem really screwy with. Man, it would be lovely if you cache them correctly. But again, right, the browser can denote, I don't want to cache that. I'm going to go and get this thing, right? We have memory constraints and everything else. The ability to say, this is my cache, and this is the thing you're going to return, because I know it's not going to change. You know, a lot of times I use images as immutables, right? Because I'm going to tag it. It's going to get replaced out. I want to cache it and destroy it later. Like that, to me, like people go, wow, you could do that? With Service Worker, you can. Yay, network proxies.
Yeah, I've actually been dealing with something quite similar. I mean, if you know how to, I would say if you have the privilege to really mess with the HTTP caching headers, that's great. But like in the real world, it doesn't actually happen all that much. Like whether you're using GitHub pages and you can control that, or even in my old company, if you wanted to do any sort of configuration of the HTTP headers, you had to go to DevOps. And in our case, the DevOps was one of the founders. It was the CTO. So it didn't happen too often because obviously he was too busy for that. So the ability to define those rules yourself, decide how to handle each request is amazing. There's actually a new open source project which I'm about to release soon. It's actually at that stage where it's been ready for weeks, but I'm too afraid to release it. So I'm like sitting in the dark and polishing it without letting anyone see it. So just speaking about it here live in front of everyone means I'm now obligated to release it. So thank you guys for that. It's called. Basically, every time I'm diving a bit deeper into service workers and caching. But when you're using cache storage, every time you install a new service worker, you call cache.addAll, which fetches all those files and stores them in cache. And then when you upgrade your service worker and go to the new service worker version, cache.addAll gets called again and fetches all those files from the network again, even though they're already in the cache. So that's terribly inefficient. I mean, if you can configure your HTTP headers correctly, that's not a problem, but you don't always have that privilege. So I've created the drop-in replacement for cache.addAll, which I call cache.adderall. It's the impatient version of cache.addall. And what it does is it works just like cache.addall, but it's lazy. So it goes to the existing caches and sees if those files exist there. And if it does, it just copies them to the new cache. If not, it just fetches them from the network. So Adderall, that's something new to be released very, very soon.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing it, because I'll be the first one to be sitting there commenting, with probably emojis. I'll emoji it, because there's always that should be the first ticket on any brand new repo. Because everybody out there is listening, you should just emoji it. Say, hey, thanks for releasing something into the world. We appreciate it. And then you can file your bugs. All good. That was an absolute side note that had no bearing on the rest of that. It sounds very interesting. I like the idea of, I like the laziness. Laziness and the way that we load things generally, or the way we move bits around to make things faster, I think sometimes gets lost in sort of the scope of just trying to, ship things. And when you don't control necessarily the entire infrastructure you sit on, that can be very difficult. So it's nice to have approaches and techniques like that where you can say, oh, I want to do this and not that.
Mm-hmm. So some of this more complicated stuff, like you're talking about, like the specifics of service worker and making them, figuring out like the different caching strategies and stuff like that. Is that one of the reasons that you created UpUp? Because if for anybody that's out there, there'll be links and all that kind of stuff. If you go look at the UpUp documentation, it's literally like there's two scripts. whole thing, and they're very small scripts that you include, and then all of a sudden your app will just work offline. I believe is the it will load offline, I believe is the idea behind it, right?
Yeah. So what was the question?
So is the reason that you built UpUp because it seems to be a very plug and play solution to just making things work offline, and it also seems very, 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 very small. So is one of the reasons that it was created to just so that people didn't really have to think about it, so that it was just, okay, let's just drop some scripts in here, and now we have some offline capabilities.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, if you're looking to build a site that is truly offline first, to really utilize service workers, to build a modern progressive web apps, like by all means, don't use UpUp. It's not for you. Buy 17 copies of the book and for your entire team, or there's tons of resources. Like whether you prefer books, there's a great Udacity course. There's amazing writing online to teach you how to do that properly. UpUp is specifically for people who are trying to simply make their site work when their user has no connectivity. It handles a very specific narrow use case and does that in the simplest way possible. Just to get people familiar with the concept. When it was released, like nobody had heard of progressive web apps. Nobody had heard of sites that can work offline. So just getting people familiar with the process, with the feature, getting them comfortable with it. Simplicity, that was the idea.
Yeah, because I know one of the examples too. So for again, I highly recommend everybody go take a look at it and look at the site and the examples. But it seems like one of the easiest things that you can do, and so one of the ideas behind kind of progressive web apps and progressive enhancement in general is also just that when the user visits the site, regardless of what's happening, they get something. And that's one of the things that seems very, very easy to configure with UpUp is creating an offline page. Like if you have like a completely separate like static HTML file or nothing else that you want to display if the user is offline. That's one of the like pretty much the first example that that the UpUp documentation gives you is, like if somebody tries to go to this path and they can't get to it, show them this instead. So there is some configuration you can do with UpUp. It's just not the real deep dive. But there are a few things that you can do to kind of customize the offline experience, which is very cool.
Yeah, so you can go for a solution which is as simple as just showing a simple branded page instead of the user landing on an offline page, seeing the little Chrome dinosaur or the Firefox error. You can just have a customized page that says, hey, you're offline, but this is our phone number, this is directions of how to reach us, whatever. But you can also go a bit deeper. You can also create you could do a whole single page app with UpUp. You can include Angular. You could include, as long as you cache all the data files that are required. Like when you start UpUp, you tell it what is the HTML page it should display, and you also can give it a list of assets that are needed to display it. So that would be the images required, the CSS, JavaScript file, but it could also be JSON files that are customized for the user. So let's say you're booking.com. So you could create an offline experience for your users, which it won't be the entire site, because obviously you're not going to cache every single hotel that they have, but the user could land in a new city, open up his phone when he's offline and still see his reservations, what hotel he's staying at tomorrow, what is the phone number, directions, etc. So it can go a bit deeper.
Well, and that's interesting because Booking.com actually did that, right? They actually, I think they were at the Progressive Web App Summit, and they talked about the notion of small steps into offline pieces where they looked for wins that where they had expectation of offline. So if I had a reservation ID or receipt that I needed they tried to offline that first, and then they tried to offline other bits and pieces and try to figure out telemetry-wise exactly how that sort of worked for not just them from a developer standpoint, because at the end of the day, it is about users, right? We're trying to make a sort of a web that is better suited to support the things that users want to do. And a lot of times that's access some bit of information that I need to get somewhere else. I need to be able to have a contact list of something. So, to both your points, right? The idea that progressive and the ability to cache all these things can happen, but as long as you find the niche that your users need the most, that's where you're going to see a lot of wins across the board, because then you can say, wow, that does work. Maybe we should make more of our app progressively enhanced for the wonders of the intertubes.
Yeah, I mean, still early days. We're still figuring out how to build good progressive web apps. We're still figuring out what makes sense which features make sense to keep offline, which ones are should be in your offline mode, which ones shouldn't. And we're also exploring the different UX, the user experience challenges and opportunities that are coming here, which is something that I've been really interested in exploring, because when your users visit a progressive web apps, I mean, they have certain expectations. I mean, when they visit your site, they expect it to not work when they're offline, so they might not try to log in later when they don't have a data plan. But you're exceeding their expectations here because your site might work. So we need a way to communicate that to users. On the other hand, users might not even realize they're offline, so they might visit your progressive web app and see content that might be stale. It might be hours or days old, and they might not realize that. So you're under-delivering on their expectations in a way here. So we need to figure out the way to communicate this to users, to let them understand, without understanding the technicalities, just like gaining confidence and trust in the abilities of the web, the same trust and confidence that they have in native app. To know that if it's your local underground metro train company, to know that you don't have to log in every morning to check if there are any changes, to trust the web app to send you push notifications to let you know, to trust that it'll work when you're offline. So we need the way to communicate that to users. And that's also something I've been exploring both in a new open source project, yes, another one, and in the book. I have a whole chapter which I'm writing now devoted to the user experience of offline and progressive web apps.
It is always curious to me. Everyone says, oh, with native, I get this very offline experience. But I've used a lot of native apps that don't have a very good offline experience at all, right? Because they're data dependent, which not and that's not unusual, right? Our applications have data that fills views, and that's how we show users things. But I always find it interesting that a lot of this, we have to be native-like. To some extent, I don't want to be really super native-like, because I've seen a lot of native go really badly. Where again, because at the end of the day, you have to ship something, and sometimes that comes at the unfortunate sort of of just shipping something that kind of worked. But that expectation is very hard to peg down. I think how from your standpoint, like, how do you approach that from a writing a book standpoint? Like, trying to take an application that's not progressive or not a PWA into a progressive web app sounds simple on paper, but when you start to take into account expectations and sort of user needs, how do you sort of balance that act?
Yeah, so the idea was indeed to take it one step at a time. So each chapter introduces something new into your app, some new ability, some new superpower that the web now has that was previously only exclusive to native. And at the end of every chapter, you're left with something that you can ship. Like you had a site that didn't work offline, and after chapter 2, it works offline. It's very basic, but it works. After another chapter, you get push notifications. You get a home screen icon. So also in your own projects, if you're not starting a new project from scratch, there are like a lot of wins you can have by improving and building upon the experience. I mean, this is progressive. I mean, you don't want to punish your users who happen to use Safari. So you want everyone to enjoy the experience. So you're building on what you have and progressively enhancing it. And there's a lot of wins to be had just by adding feature by feature. I mean, progressive web app, it's not a thing. It's not a technology. It's not like it's not a plugin for progressive web app that you install. It's basically just an idea of how to use many different modern technologies to build something that is amazing. And you can pick and choose pieces from that and start in the simplest way, just by adding a home screen icon or adding push notifications or offline, or there's so many places to start with without taking the dive to a full progressive web app, which I still encourage to do.
Yeah, I think a lot of that is really interesting because so I actually have kind of two things that I want to get into, because I'm very interested in the UX of a lot of this new stuff, because a lot of it is things that web developers have not had to deal with before. Specifically, talking about expectations and things like that. There have been several threads going on over Twitter the past couple of weeks about like so many really random websites immediately prompting you to send you notifications, right? And a lot of that is really just, okay, a lot of web developers have not had to deal with that before. And so because a lot of when, like on a mobile app, a lot of times you'll get it right when you install, but of course you don't really install web application. So does it really make sense to do it as soon as it pops up? Does it make sense to just do it as you're about to implement that, as you're about to as soon as they've selected something so they can send you something? Like a product hunt is actually one that drives me crazy, because it came up and then I immediately clicked yes, and eventually I had to turn it off because I'm just getting notifications about a bunch of stuff I really don't care about. I mean, like I like product hunt, but I can't, like, I just can't, I can't do it. I mean,
there's no more space in your house is what you're telling me, Danny.
I just can't. But yeah, so it's just, so it gets just the UX part of things kind of gets tough, and I'm sure that's one of the things that you're starting to think about. And one thing you said that I hadn't thought about is exactly, well, what do you offline, right? Because you can't, and you don't really think about it, because it really just like, okay, I want all of it to work offline. Well, like, is that really reasonable, or is that actually useful? Is that actually useful to try to patch everything so that it works offline, or there are certain parts that you want to work offline? Like if you're like a news site, for example, if you have a blog or something like that, and you have a multi-page blog, it makes sense for the content of the articles to be available offline. But does the comment section need to render offline, or can you just show an icon that says, "Hey, you're offline. We can't pull in comments right now"? So a lot of that is really cool, and you said like we're still figuring this stuff out. And I think people like you writing books and stuff like that, trying to help us figure out what we should, just because we can do it, so we know we can do it. Let's try to figure out why we should do it and when we should do it. And I had another. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so the whole notification thing was literally something I wrote about perhaps a week ago, and yeah, I mean, if you follow my own advice from 3 minutes ago to just go ahead and implement stuff, so it's not always a good advice. I mean, what do I know? If you're just implementing a push notification that just as soon as a user lands on the website, it just pops up, this site would like to send you a push notification. That's destructive. I mean, not many users are going to accept that unless it's like Facebook or a site that you use every day for work. It's telling me what the site wants to do. Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say, yes, local NBC station in the Midwest, I do not want you to send me push notifications.
Yeah, I mean, you're pushing your own agenda on me as a site. So instead of that, you take the advantage to, first of all, not use the native UI for offering a notification, but pop up some sort of offer for the user when it makes sense. And don't sell the user on the feature, but sell him on the benefit. So, for example, on the website, in the book, we're building a hotel website. So instead of just as soon as the user lands, popping up, this site would like to send you a push notification, the user actually makes a reservation and then offer him, would you like to receive updates when your reservation changes? So this way, the user understands the value for him instead of offering, would you like to send notification? That's a value for the user. Like, am I going to get spam? Am I going to get, it just raises more questions. So stress the benefit for the user, and that's a great opportunity. And I mean, this whole thing is like, that's the idea behind progressive web apps. I mean, the difference between a native app and a progressive web app is that a native app asks for all the permissions up front. You have to go through an install. You have to go through a vicious funnel of downloading the app, going to the Play Store, installing it, everything. Progressive web app is just a website that you start, and it progressively gains these new superpowers. When it needs to send you notifications, it'll ask. When it sees that you visited a few days in a row, it'll offer you to install the icon. That's the progressive idea here.
I've never heard of installing an app referred to as a vicious funnel? Is that what you said?
Yeah. So at my last job, we helped a lot of companies get more installs, and it is a vicious funnel. I mean, because you pay for each banner view, and a user clicks the banner, visits the App Store, has to click install, has to accept the permissions, it has to download, it has to install, and then it has to launch it for the first time. And as much as 20%, I think, of users are lost at each step. So you end up paying a lot of money for each install. So there's the word friction has been used to describe this also. There's a lot of friction, and the web is frictionless. You go to a website and you can just get the data, unless that site decides to do the door slam and pop up a new message saying install our app.
Well, and that's going to get knocked too, right? Interstitials are, the Google search team has said basically, if you're using interstitials, we're going to downrank you, which was a big to do. I know there was a lot of upset people about that, but realistically, again, this was something that was for users, right? Users didn't particularly care for interstitials that blocked UI and the thing that they actually wanted to do, as opposed to the pounded marketing sort of repertoire where, they're trying to drive you into something that you don't even know reasonably as a user that you want to do, given the fact you can't even look at the site. I mean, that's one of the things. I mean, the web has had these problems over the years, right? We had the great pop-up epidemic, which I don't know if anyone remembers the pop-up epidemic anymore, because it kind of went away. We had, browsers got a feature that blocked pop-ups. I remember that was the thing. That was hellacious. I thought the web might die if we didn't stop using pop-ups. It was that bad.
Yeah. I mean, the whole native app model it's a lot better for the sites, for the app developers in a way, not for the user. I mean, I go to that Midwest NBC affiliate which you mentioned because I just want to know the weather, like for tomorrow. I'm just going to be in that town for 2 days. I just want to know the weather, and as I land on that page, like I see the weather, and before I can read it, it's blocked with a pop-up. So that's very destructive for the user. But as app developers and as that the site owners were willing to inflict that damage on their users, because even if 1 in 20 users installed that app, once he had that app, they were able to re-engage them with push notifications, and they had an icon on the home screen, and it worked offline. So you could punish the many, so you could take your get a return on your investment from the few in a way, because each app install was worth so much because you could re-engage them. And now you have the same features on the web. Like that's the gist of progressive web apps, giving those powers to the web, but without the hurt.
Well, and I think you're right, without the hurt. And I think that as developers, you really have to take that approach where it's not force feeding people stacks of permission requests the first time they load a screen. Because the studies show that re-engagement is a big deal, right? Re-engagement really drives revenue for businesses, and businesses have a particular want to do that, right? You have to be a running concern. But that doesn't mean you have to just throw things at your user constantly. Like you can have a decent approach that is not necessarily, driving 90% of your traffic away to find that 10% of recovery traffic, right? You want to find that balance. Let us not go towards here's an entire list of permission sets that I need to. Here's a lot of allow pop-ups I got to deal with just to get to the actual thing I want to do.
Yeah, especially for just because a lot of stuff doesn't need that, right? I mean, and I think the example of, again, you're like, okay, like there's an article popped up on, Yahoo or something like that that's pointing to a local site or something like that. If the first time I go to that site to read one article and I get bombarded with all these permissions, I'm gonna be like, no, I don't want any of this. And God forbid people start blocking content to their site unless you allow certain permissions, which technically is something that you could do if you wanted to, or just make it really, really bad. But hopefully that won't, putting up these artificial barriers to people actually using your stuff. It's tricky, and again, this is just a lot of this is just stuff that as web developers we've not had to deal with before. So it'll be interesting as we keep moving forward with a lot of this stuff. I actually have a question for both of you that I've been sitting on for a little bit about service workers, because part of the progressive web apps thing is this idea of an app shell or something like that. And the way that it's oftentimes described is if your app was installed, this is the thing that would be installed. Right, so like the header, the menu, all that kind of stuff. There seems to be kind of two lines of thought that are going on a lot now. There's one line of thought that's make the initial payload as small as humanly possible, and lazy load things in after that and things of that nature, which is great. And service workers can also help with that, because as you have those pieces, then you don't have to go get them again. What I'm curious about is if you think what will happen, especially if we keep referring to it as kind of an install, if developers will, especially when service workers are everywhere, if they will stop caring about the initial payload size, because they're like, so what? It takes 20 seconds to get the app to a first render, but we're just going to call that the install phase. And then after the service worker boots up, we don't need that anymore. Because there are other mediums that do this and it works well. Video games are an example where, if you play like The Last of Us, when you boot it up, you sit through a long load screen, but then after that you don't sit through anymore. Now, I don't think that's a good thing for the web, but do you guys think that we may start seeing some of that stuff, especially if we refer to it as like an install phase?
I think when you're installing an app, or for sure a game, you're already invested in it, so you're willing to suffer through that install phase. I think the web is so fleeting that even if you were to inflict that, I'm saying that again, even if you were to inflict that on the user, what matters most of all is not service workers. It's not everything that happens after the install. It's that first visit, that first experience you're giving to the user. So if you're going to be delegating everything to after an install, you're going to lose way too many of your users. You have to always worry about what happens before the service worker ever takes control of the page. You have to give the best first impression. And that's going to remain true no matter how much we shove into the installation.
Yeah, and I think I think part of that is also going to potentially be on us, anybody that's involved in the community, because one of the things with progressive web apps that's in a lot of articles and stuff is making your web app more app-like. And I think it may be important for us to point out that it's like we want to take, and this is also said a lot, it's like we're trying to take the good parts of the web and the good parts of native and smoosh them together so that they can be used. So we don't want everything to be 100% native app-like, because that means you also pull in the bad stuff.
Well, but again, to some extent, it's an idea of expectation, right? So when you talk about a game and a web app, they're really two different things. A game has a certain set of expectations that people have sort of dealt with for a long time, you know, even back in console days of old, right? I plug something in, I have to wait a second for it to load. This is the nature of the way this works. People have this idea and expectation that that's okay. Like, I expect you to have to load something that's larger than I would normally load. But that's not the same expectation that someone has when they're trying to look up a recipe, for instance, right? I don't want you to load 20 seconds worth of stuff so that I can see a 5-item list of stuff so that I can make my pie. Like, that's not, the expectations are different. And if you don't take into account the expectation, then you end up with the scenario you discussed, which is, great, I'll just preload all this stuff and I'll worry about my my post render. I'll worry about it the second time they open this up. It'll be all super fast. But at the same time, you can't sort of you can't deny the fact of the thing that you're doing to an end user's device either. You know, that I don't know if you saw Addie's tweet yesterday about the CNET article which is 137 megs to download, right? Like, there's no, like, you can't spin that as good. You can't. Like, you can't say, you know what, you needed 137 megs to read this article. Like, it would be, that's a tough, you know, pill to swallow from a user perspective, right? You've destroyed their expectation of what an article to read is about. And so I think that, you know, if we start to see that, one is that browser vendors get together and say, look, you shouldn't be preloading 50 megs worth of data up front before you get to a paint. That's not the way this is not the way this is going down. Like, intervention time. And two, if you go that way, to Tal's point, like, you're just going to end up with users who are going to go, I don't want any part of this. Because I mean, I don't know a lot of users who go, you know what, I really like having to wait for the install experience of this app store. I'm really glad I installed 75 megs to view an event schedule. Like, no one ever has said that. If you've said that, please contact me. I expect angry hate mail on Twitter any second. But I don't foresee that as a problem, because I think users will tell us, and rightfully so, don't do this. You've broken my expectation and you've ruined my day.
See, so I don't see that for consumer-facing public things. Where I do see it starting to be a problem are when you have a captive audience for something, and because it will happen. It absolutely will happen. Just because you think of all the other, like, just bad things that people do on the internet that we've all done at some point in time, things like these things will happen. And hopefully, because like you said that CNN article downloaded 100 and however many, a lot of stuff just to read an article. I bet a decent number of people still read it. And
who's to say? I didn't even know who loaded it. I'll put a link in the show notes to it. It was quite the thing. Like, I was shocked. Truly shocked. But no, it was just huge, dude. It was crazy. It's a sight to behold by far if you want to go look in DevTools. But to the captive audience thing, I mean, that's an interesting question, because if you go away from consumer side and you go into the corporate side of life, there is a difference. And I know this because I preload a lot of data in corporate web apps that don't use Service Worker, that use the old file system APIs. that were available in Chrome, because we had a thing that required, let's just say it wasn't tiny, like lots and lots of data, and it needed to work in offline capacity, and it did a really crazy thing. That to me is a sort of a different thing. Number one, I know the connection that the thing starts on. Number two, I know exactly the use case of that user. Number three, I know the reach of that thing. I know that it's not going to expand outside of the sort of realm from a corporate standpoint of where it is. Like, it's not going to be a consumer thing. So there is a difference. I agree with you there. Like a captive audience where we need to stream down a lot of data that's going to do something that's outside of the norm. Okay. But should I prevent the use of that app initially? In a couple of the apps that we have in corporate, we don't. Like it still lets you use it now while it's pre-caching data in the back, as it does this sort of magical thing. But it's an interesting question. Like, what are the use cases? So I'm sure we'll fish out the use cases, and then we'll probably break some stuff. Because if you're not breaking anything, break something today. Just words of wisdom from Justin. Break an API today, ladies and gentlemen.
Until then, just wait for the book. I'm sure it will answer all of our questions, right? You've thought of every scenario.
A few of them, yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious. Like, have you thought about some of this about some of this stuff with Service Worker, with how people can potentially abuse it, and how to avoid some of those patterns?
So the first thing I did after the 2014 talk, where I heard about service workers for the first time, I tried to abuse them. That's just what I do with every new technology. Just like try to pass the security and try that. But we're talking more about patterns. Yeah, I mean, that's a worry here, that people are going to be saying, yeah, I mean, I can cache in the background, so why don't I wait till the user is idle, and then I cache and save into her cache hundreds of megabytes of images, which she might need. Because why not? I mean, there's no real cost to me. But users have to pay for those downloads. I mean, people pay a lot of money for data access, and you can't abuse that privilege. So that's one way you could use that. Another way is going up and up, as you've mentioned. Yeah, I mean, we're still figuring things out. And yeah, as you said, like if it's a captive audience, like I don't mind waiting 10 minutes for Jira to load up the first time I use it, or even installing a browser add-on. But if I'm just visiting that Midwest NBC affiliate, then the first time I would like it to load immediately and, captivate me, so that I'm sold on it. Like, that's the difference between, like, a web app is not a native app. You have to progressively, I mean, there's the progressive bit here. You have to earn the place. You have to earn the privilege to take up space on the user's machine, to earn the privilege for him to give you permission to send notifications. You can't forget the progressive part. And you can't forget that you have to start with the simplest common ground, something that works for everyone. Like you shouldn't exclude them just because they happen to use an iPhone.
And yeah, no, I think sometimes the word progressive gets lost, and that's unfortunate because the web is very large and we have many things.
And we're developing on brand new Microsoft Surfaces and MacBooks with Retinas while connected to a local server or fiber, and we're forgetting that that's not how our websites are accessed in the real world. Well, I mean, it's a lesson we learned with mobile. That's how we started doing mobile first, and now it's time to learn the same thing with connectivity and do offline first.
Which is why I do all my develop on a sat uplink. It's the only way to go. Stick a satellite on top of your roof, people. And test on devices. You should always test on devices. So we're running up against time. Tal, if people want to find you out there on the intertubes, where would they look?
So Twitter is always great. We'll have it, I'm sure, like in the show notes. It's Talater, Talater, on Twitter. And next week, I'm also flying to San Francisco, and I'm going to be in the Chrome Dev Summit. So by all means, if any of you are over there, please come over, say hi, and let's chat about stuff, about how we can break the web, break some new APIs. And hit me up on GitHub, send some issues, tell me my code sucks. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. We greatly appreciate it. I also will be at Chrome Dev, so I will see you next week. Danny, any parting words as we?
No, not this week. I apologize for hijacking some of the end bit to talk about all the bad things that I'm assuming are going to happen with service workers, alongside all of the good things. But no, Kyle, thank you very much for coming on. I think I'm a big fan of the stuff that you do. So I appreciate you coming on to share a little bit more. I'm looking forward to your book.
Yeah, when does the book come out? By the way, yeah.
Good, because I was worried, like my last 3 words were "my code sucks," and I was worried that were going to be my final words. So thanks for asking. So I've written so far 9 chapters out of 12. Obviously, I've saved the hardest ones for the end. I'm hoping January, February, March, something like that. But this is my first book. Like, I'm about to enter the editing adventure.
And is the book in early access?
Yeah, it's already on early access. You can already read the first 4 books, the first 4 chapters on O'Reilly and on Safari, and we're going to be releasing more and more chapters each month.
Fantastic. I'm looking forward to it.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. And ladies and gentlemen, this has been episode 113, Up and Away, and Service Workers and all the things. I've been your host, Justin Ribeiro. As always, Danny Blue. Danny, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks very much, Justin.
And Tal, thank you again. We will talk to everyone later. Have a great rest of your week.
Bye, everybody.
See you. Bye.